So, greetings, hello. It's Thomas Daffern speaking. It's my weekly broadcast. I missed it last week because we had the summer solstice event instead. And I'm going to be talking about that today. So today is the 28th of June, 2020. And here we are, planet's still on lockdown, mostly, although there are, you know, the world's split. Some people are saying come out of lockdown, let's all go and get our lives back. Others are saying no, the virus is still there. I've been looking at the evidence and weighing it up and looking at the figures. I also listened to a very good talk by Andrew Harvey, who's a scholar of, you know, the Upanishads and the Vedas and a spiritual seeker of many years standing. And I listened very carefully when he said he'd been in touch with leading epidemiologists and scientists around the world who were saying, no, the virus isn't over, it's not gone away, it will kill people if we come out of lockdown. So I grieve, I think he's right, I grieve for the people flocking to the beaches in Bournemouth and wherever, in Brighton, Sussex, England. I think this is premature. There's a kind of defiant mood, no, you know, we the people will win, but I think you have to be very careful. You know, pride goeth before a fall, as the old adage goes. So anyway, I think that to come out totally of lockdown at the moment is premature until this disease is properly solved, resolved and cured. It's a huge, you know, dilemma and problem for humanity. The number one problem, as far as I'm concerned, is to absolutely prove conclusively its origin, its etiology. Did this come from a, you know, human-engineered virus that somehow leaked, or is it totally a natural occurrence? Now, the scientific community seems to be split on that, but the and you know, the layperson, even an educated layperson who knows a bit of science and knows something about it, will find it difficult to decide. It did come up as a topic during the summer solstice discussions, as I will reveal shortly. So what I think I'm going to do in this session, therefore, is do a resume for those that weren't able to join us on the night. It was a, let me just explain, there was a 24-hour summer solstice peace festival that we'd organised in honour of what normally at Stonehenge is a joyous event when people go and celebrate the sunrise. And I've been there many times organising the Peace Steward team there and with colleagues and so on. But nobody was able to go in person, so we thought, why don't we do this online? And I undertook to do the intellectual side of it, the academics, the talking heads. Other people were going to do the music, and in fact quite a few kind of musical Stonehenge festival type events seemed to pop up. And I'm sure they were all very good and people enjoyed them. And you can listen to them. So I admire the spirit of our, you know, fellow citizens that organised online stuff. My contribution was to do an academic type, peace-related 24-hour online festival. And I'm going to run through what the content was and who spoke. For those that either haven't listened or, you know, we're slowly trying to put up the footage that was recorded on our YouTube channel, which is the same channel this is on. IPSKIP1, it's called, the acronym of my Institute of Peace Studies and Global Philosophy. So, you can read about it there. The context is that the idea of a festival at Stonehenge developed in the 70s, really, 1970s. It's an iconic place in the landscape. It featured in the Beatles film Help. It's an unknown tribute to the ancients who built it. It's a spiritual temple. And so in the 70s and late 60s, people in Britain, as a mass sort of public awareness movement, began to think, wouldn't it be nice to go there for the solstice? Now, The Druids had been doing this all along. There were Druid ceremonies there since probably the 1800s at least. During the 1900s, a lot. Every summer solstice, robed Druids would go from different orders, different groupings. And from even earlier, I think the idea was there. And of course, much, much earlier, it was also a custom to go there for the midsummer solstice. So when the 70s came along, people revived this idea, and it became gradually built up into a great idea, which combined music, performances, bands. It was the heyday of the hippie era. People would go, let their hair down, dance, and explore various psychedelic substances. That was the thing that the 60s and 70s were doing. So they're exploring consciousness, and the groups of playing were plugged into that kind of thing. One of the most famous was a group called Hawkwind and others. I didn't go to those original festivals. I was studying philosophy at Bristol University at the time and beginning a sort of spiritual journey of my own. By the time I went to Stonehenge as a foot pilgrim in the, I think it was 75, May of 75, I just went as one foot pilgrim one May morning and walked, and you could just walk in among the stones. There was a little string barrier. I don't think it was even a fee or a nominal fee. And I did some meditation, and at that time I got very interested in studying Druidry and the ancient wisdom of the Celts. I was reading books about Anne Ross on pagan Celtic Britain. I'd been studying at the University of Bristol the philosophy of Buddhism and yoga and also the European traditions of philosophy. And I realised that the Druids were like our homegrown yogis. They were our dharmic teachers, our Buddhist teachers, if you want, without having heard of Buddha, but they were still going for enlightenment. And I realised these temples were their testimony. Anyway, that began a long journey for me, and I won't go into all the details. I've written an autobiography, you can read it there, but I eventually, soon after that, went to Canada to study independently at the University of Calgary and work in hospitals. And that's when I did my major 4-year academic study of comparative global philosophy. I then came back to Britain and launched Philosophers for Peace. And so when the festival had developed by then and become quite a big thing, groups used to go from all over Britain. I was now doing another degree at the University of London, so again I was more on the academic path. But I heard about this conflict, tragic incident called the Battle of the Beanfield, and I had friends who were there, and I felt it was wrong. Thatcher was then the Prime Minister of Britain, and she'd used the police in a very heavy-handed way to smash up vehicles, to intern people in prison cells all over England, actually. Many hundreds of them. And why were they so afraid of the hippies? What was it that these people wanting to go and watch the sun coming up and smoke a few joints and stuff, why was that such a threat? Well, I think it was a threat because the joyous ideology that they represented is a threat to the work, pay taxes, fund wars, go and be soldiers mentality of the armed state, whichever state you're talking about, in this case the British state. I was studying the history of the Cold War and modern history at the time in the University of London. And I later, after graduating, became, as you know, director of a centre working on peace studies development, which is still going. It's not based at the University of London anymore. It's now autonomous. And during the course of that, I set up a mediation service that dealt with interfaith dispute resolutions. And I was approached by some pagans who were involved in that Battle of the Beanfield, much later, now we're talking the 90s, who brought all the evidence, told me all about it, and said, look, there's never been justice done here. We've never had apologies. The police acted like total fascist lunatics. It's never been acknowledged that they did wrong. And so we decided to set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Stonehenge. This was a man called George Fursoff, who was a pagan priest. He was an interesting man. He lived in Bristol. He was from that era. He'd been to Cambridge. He was an academic himself with a master's in Cambridge, and he wrote a book about the 60s and the impact of that on British academia. There were sit-ins at the LSE and so on. He was a highly intelligent man, a Polish, half Scottish. And we worked quite closely together. He became secretary of this thing and I was chair. We had about 30 meetings in and around Wiltshire where we got experts and people who'd been involved in the Battle of the Beanfield and surrounding events to come forward and give testimony. It was filmed, it was recorded, it was documented, you know, with minutes and stuff. And we had the police come, National Trust, English Heritage, various Druid elders, various New Age travellers, you know, who'd been involved in the incidents. Christians turned up because they were interested in peacemaking, so it was close to Salisbury, so we had people come from the Diocese of Salisbury. Later on I met the Bishop of Salisbury, who was I love Salisbury Cathedral. It's one of my favourite cathedrals, actually. It has this wonderful font of the waters coming out in continual running water. If you haven't seen it, go to Salisbury. And in fact, we had the last Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Stonehenge meeting in the Theological College next door to Salisbury Cathedral in the same year as the Brexit referendum, 2016. And, you know, it's been a nightmare ever since, folks. So anyway, that's just to give you the background. So that's the context. That Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Stonehenge is still going. We had a meeting there then, and it was, you know, it came out of a lot of thought and research and work. I did publish a book about it all, which is available, you know, if you're interested. This gives the fuller picture, the background. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Stonehenge, a report on a work in progress. The cover has the peace sword of Albion, which is here behind me, in a lake in Scotland. I published this after living in Scotland for 7 years. I think I was in Scotland when it was published. And I came down to Salisbury for that last meeting. It's not the last, it's just the last we've had for a while. So anyway, so the idea arose, let's do a 24-hour thing. And I undertook to do the academic side and pulled together a list of speakers, friends, colleagues, people I know of their work. I thought they'd be appropriate for talking about peace from different angles. And obviously I've done, you know, work like this for a long time. As an academic, I've chaired 30 meetings also in the House of Lords for my Peace Institute, getting people to talk about national policy. Why don't we have a peace policy in the UK? Why do we have a war policy, a military policy? We have a defence policy. We have think tanks like Chatham House or the Institute of Strategic Studies that think about military and international policy, but nobody talks about peace policy or thinks about it. So I set up a Centre for Peace Policy Research and organised these meetings in the House of Lords, which again I could restart. And if I lived in London, I would. But now I'm in France, you know. And so anyway, so it was a pleasure to organise this meeting. It was quite a marathon. It was 24 hours, and I'm going to run through who the speakers were and just summarise what they said for those that haven't heard it, and so you get a flavour and an overview of what went on during the night. Firstly, it started, I thought it would be appropriate to start with a little ceremony, a ritual. So we had a peace ritual led by my daughter, actually, I'm very proud to say, Sophia Craig Daffern, who lives in Brighton, in Kemp Town, the part of Brighton where I grew up, in fact. And she's become a Druidess. She's really interested in spirituality. She studies, you know, the sacred Ogham alphabet, the runes, and the links with Ogham, the tree alphabet. She's very much a green Druidess. She was on the Extinction Rebellion March and to London. And she sees things through the magical lens of Druid engaged peace magic, if you want. And for her, green magic, earth magic, is the same as peace magic. It's a theme that came up again and again during the night. Anyway, she led us on a guided visualization and a journey to Stonehenge, and sang some wonderful haunting melodies in her beautiful voice. She's a trained singer as well. Okay, so that was brilliant, way to start the thing. And then we had a speaker called Frigga Astraf, who was speaking from the Netherlands, who is a pagan from the Norse tradition, the runic tradition, and is a great lover of the work of Freyr Aswin, a great rune teacher whose work I've known about for years and treasure likewise. And Frigga has founded this thing called the Flame of Frif. Now, the Flames of Frif is a peace movement from a pagan perspective. So Frigga is an expert in thinking through the nature of peace from a runic perspective. And she spoke very movingly about Frith is the word for peace in Old Anglo-Saxon and in Dutch. And it's connected to words for like freedom and joy as well. And in German and Norse and Scandinavian languages and Anglo-Saxon, these words all had a common meaning. It meant something like safety, well-being, security, trust, and Frith is a very, very important principle that Anglo-Saxons, believed in. King Alfred the Great, who was the greatest of the Anglo-Saxon kings, he also had to swear an oath that he would guard the Frith of the nation. And that was the coronation oath of the kings, right down to fairly recently. It was written, I believe, by St Dunstan. And if you read the actual oath, coronation oath in Anglo-Saxon, specifically says, I swear to guard the Frith of the people. And there are other undertakings they undertake. I think it would be nice to bring that back, that component in the oath when King Charles is sworn in as the next monarch. So anyway, Frigga spoke very movingly about her work, and it was fascinating to hear. Then we moved overseas again. We moved this time to Israel, to an amazing man called Shlomo So Home. And Shlomo is an old friend of mine. I've interviewed him already in Israel. When I went there to Israel, Palestine, to set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East. You see, I'm a restless kind of soul, and to me, Dharma or truth or justice is all one thing. And so I can't just take on one issue and then that's enough. So I took on the Stonehenge thing, but later I decided, no, let's take on the problem of Britain and Ireland. Let's take on that. So I set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Britain and Ireland, and we had meetings. But then after a while, after 9/11 started, the chaos in the Middle East, the Iraq War, I decided, well, hang on, all these problems seem to go back to the Middle East. We need one for the Middle East. And nobody was doing it. If other people were doing it, I wouldn't have to. I feel like a fire chief in a city of burning buildings like Stalingrad under the Blitz. And, we've only got one hose, so you have to, point it at different buildings that are on fire. And so the Middle East is one of the epicenters. If we can heal the conflicts in the Middle East, I reckon we can heal the world. So I had interviewed already this amazing judge, Shlomo So Home. He then spoke movingly on our solstice talks. Now, he was a full judge in the legal profession who, at the pinnacle of his career, he was asked by the Knesset to become what's called the ombudsman for future generations. Now, this was a unique thing that was created. I think there was one in Sweden as well, attached to the Riksdag, the Swedish parliament. The idea is that you have a spokesman who looks at the impact of legislation on future generations. You see, parliaments and the quality of the legislation they pass will be judged by their impact on future generations. I believe the current parliament in the UK is abysmal, atrocious, and will be judged by future generations abysmally as the worst parliament ever assembled, because it seems intent on doing a Brexit against the will of the people of Scotland, people of Northern Ireland are most intelligent people in England. Yes, the mobsters, whirled up by Facebook data, fanaticism and targeted illegal psychological warfare, as revealed by Chris Wiley. They've been whipped up to this frenzied hatred against Europe. But as a European Brit, I feel ashamed that we've fallen for that so easily. They're laughing all the way to the bank. And they did it for money, monetary gains. People like Steve Bannon, Farage. They move in a circle of billionaires, the Mercers and co. Some Russian oligarchs as well. Average people in England haven't got a clue what was done. Read Chris Wiley's book, you'll understand it. So, but anyway, that tragedy is what happens if you have people who seize control of power, they don't only care about they don't only not care about future generations, they also don't actually care about this generation, because the policies they're pursuing are against the wishes and well-being of the current generation. But hey, so what? Politics is about power, domination, control, and if you don't like it, I'll shoot you. That's how Stalin thought. That's how Hitler thought. These guys are almost getting to the same plane. And as a Democrat, and as a Liberal Democrat, and as a Green Liberal Democrat, I find that, and a Social Democrat as well, I have many commitments to that whole progressive, Rooseveltian, central, Keir Hardie, Petra Kelly, Gladstonian view of there is such a thing as progress, there is such a thing as goodness, and we must manifest that through the state. That was the point of 19th century philosophy, that was the Hegelian concept. Well, I stick with that. And I want my state, whether it's in Britain or France or the European Union, to manifest the good that is in us all, and not stimulate evil, division and conflict, which is what these crooks are doing. And it's the same in America with Trump's seizure of power from the general progressive tradition that is American democracy. And that was exemplified by Roosevelt, but also Obama, Jimmy Carter and many others. And Kennedy before he was shot. And his brother Robert Kennedy before he was shot too. Anyway, Shlomo talked about the bigger picture of politics. So he wasn't talking about narrow party politics. He was talking about well-being and care and concern for future generations on the planet. That was his job for the Knesset. And he then wrote a book called Future Intelligence about how we humans have to cultivate this ability to see things from a long-term perspective. Should I rob that bank and beat up that old lady and, burn that house? Well, no, actually. Looking at it from a future intelligence perspective, that's very serious bad behaviour. And so, if you look at things from the perspective of the future, you then begin to think ethically, was Shlomo's point. And he's developing techniques. He's set up an academy for sustainable leadership training for people that want to train to be the next generation of political leaders, men and women who can think big enough to care about the future. Anyway, his talk was very moving. You can listen to it. This is now going up live. I'm just doing a summary here. And then we had another talk from a brilliant Canadian intellectual and sage called Satyen Raja. Originally Indian from Uganda, lived in London, ended up in BC, where he's been doing trainings for people on the edge, people that are either working in authoritarian roles like police or whatever, or people that are non-violent activists and so on. So, and also in leadership roles in the corporate sector, he's done training. So Satyen has developed some techniques, and he shared some of them with us in this amazing talk he did, which are very useful. You can listen to them. If you're in conflict with somebody, or somebody's really going for it, or two people are conflicting, the question he thinks should be asked in such situations is, instead of criticising them or grumbling or attacking them back or whatever, ask them, what is the highest positive vision that you are now trying to articulate and embody? What's the purpose of all your attacks? What is the positive gain for humanity if you follow through these attacks? What is it you're trying to establish here against me or against the other person or whatever? And if you ask that question, it sort of stops aggressive people in their tracks, because they say, I hadn't thought of that. What am I trying to? And so then once you get them thinking positively, it gets a reorientation going. So instead of thinking about anger and coming from this place of emotional reaction, you can get to more the place Shlomo's talking about, where you're thinking about future intelligence. You're thinking, the reason I was attacking you is because actually, I want to build a friendship with you, or I actually want to work on this project in such and such a way. Or I want to enhance my own self-image or my own standing, and I think that by attacking you, that's going to make me feel bigger. Well, actually, I realise that's probably not the way to go. And if we were friends, probably we'd both be happier. Anyway, that was one of the things Sachin shared. And he runs a very active group called Warrior Sage. So he's interested in, and he's taught martial arts for a long time. So how do you move from being a warrior in the positive sense to then being a non-violence activist? You see, warriors are pretty important. They might be necessary to defend all of us, historically they have been. Every tribe had a warrior group, a warrior class, whether it was Native Indian, American Indian, or Celtic, Druidical people, or the Romans, or the Greeks, or the Celts, or whatever, or Hebrews, But the warriors, they developed things like courage, discipline, stamina, obedience, vision, etc. And it was a spiritual thing. Warriors were trained, taught to be pious, to be doing this work for the community. It's a great honour, actually. But the important thing was that the warriors were later trained to an even higher level of awareness, whereby they no longer needed physical weapons. They didn't need to use swords or bows and arrows or guns. And also, they didn't even need to have enemies. So the highest degree of warriorship was when you began the lowest grade of Druid training. So having been a warrior, having learned courage, learned discipline, learned fidelity, truth, etc., you then apply those skills to peacemaking. You then transmute from being a warrior to becoming a sage. And that transition was there in all the cultures, be it American Indian, African, European, Middle Eastern, and so on. Every culture has that. It's the difference between being the king and the prophet in ancient Israel. The prophet, Isaiah or Ezekiel or whatever, had the duty to upbraid the king, who was the warrior chief, the Saul, who, the Saul was the warrior. He didn't do his work properly. So Samuel then re-anointed a new king, David, who was more able to hear the divine aspect of things. And so, David was a better warrior king, and even to the point that he was himself a kind of a prophet. Witness the Psalms, and in Islam, David is regarded as a great prophet. So anyway, Sachin spoke very movingly about this warrior-sage transition, which was very appropriate because obviously we're talking about Stonehenge and the Druid culture that built it and what their beliefs and values were, which can be reconstructed from scholarly work and experiential work. Okay, then we had a little break because we weren't live all 24 hours. We had the odd 10-minute break. I think we had a 15-minute break. And then came back on. And a very interesting discussion got underway. We were joined by an interesting lady called Donna Tommasino, from Nevada, but who just got back from the Polynesian Islands. She'd spent a lot of time, and has over the years, in Hawaii and Polynesia, and she studied a lot their spiritual paths, the Huna tradition and all the others. And she was able to give some reflections on peace from that perspective. And she's also worked for many years as research director at the Institute of Heart Math in, well, it was originally in California. I'm not sure where it is now, but it was founded in California. And it's a specialist scientific, philosophical, medical body that investigates the nature of the heart, the human heart, both the physical organ but also the metaphysical heart. And the people behind it have discovered some very interesting stuff about the heart. That it has its own neurological network of nerves, that it has its own consciousness. It's the first thing that starts beating in the babies, in the embryo. It's the first thing that gets going, that heartbeat, long before the brain is formed. And it's the last thing that goes at the moment of death. The brain can go, but when the heart stops, that's death. So, anyway, she spoke very movingly. We were in discussion with another Druid. This is a man called Henk Vis from Avebury, who's recently moved to Avebury, and is also actually from Holland, and a friend of Frigga Astraf. Henk spoke very movingly about his understanding of Druidry, why he got involved with it, where he's coming from, and he talked particularly about the need to observe ceremonies, particularly the moon. He studied with Terry Dobney for many years, who is the Archdruid of Avebury. Unfortunately incapacitated, so I didn't ask him to speak. He's lost his speech, he's had a stroke, and Terry can't speak, but I hope Terry will listen to the, what we were saying with his partner Susan Lomas. So they were with us in spirit, and Henk spoke about Avebury in general. He gave a very good talk, I think, and we had a discussion going. And so then it was, I think I gave a talk around that time. There was a lull in the thing, so I had prepared a few talks. I was doing the filler talks between speakers, so to speak. And I gave a talk at that point about my understanding of Druidry, peacemaking, how to solve the conflicts in the world, what we need to do as Druids and as intellectuals and academics. I talked about the World Intellectual Forum, my Peace Institute, and the Mediation Service, and so on. Then there was a poetry reading. Mary Napper, who used to be Secretary General of my institute before she retired, she's a poetess and artist living on the Welsh Marches. And she was involved with me in setting up the Stonehenge Truth and Reconciliation Commission, along with George, and she actually wrote a poem during the 2001 solstice event, which we were there as peace stewards. So she read the poem out and pre-recorded it, so it'll be available in due course. And then we had likewise a showing of a film, a little excerpt from Nicola Haig's documentary called Druids, which is a bit of an epic. She's gone around interviewing all the Druids of Britain and so on, and interesting historical footage. And she showed like a little mini 10-minute clip from that, which again was fascinating. And then sunrise came early. It was 4:52 in the morning, UK time. And there was a little film that we showed from Rollo Morfling, the Archdruid of Stonehenge, who had